Hey there everybody, PTPOP here with all four lobes of my brain securely bound behind my back, and welcome to another episode of Call Center Survivor. Today, I'm going to be talking about how working in a call center will change you. Stay tuned, baby.
Would you like fries with that? Would you like fries with that?
So before we dive into the main topic at hand, I'd like to ask each and every one of you to give me the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, just punch the snot out of it. And that's the easiest and the most inexpensive way you can support this channel. If you do have some extra cashola, you have some extra moolah in your pockets and you want to support this channel financially, your financial support would be and will be greatly appreciated. Please become a member here and see behind the scene videos, or go to my Patreon channel and subscribe there, where I'm going to be producing and publishing videos that YouTube will not allow on its platform. So you'll have to pay to see them, but I'm going to be talking about a variety of things, and including controversial topics and people that I interview on here that YouTube forbodes me from listing and producing and promoting. So check that out. Thanks very much. So today's topic is a topic that was brought to my attention by a gentleman out of the United Kingdom, and he is a resident of the country of Scotland, and he has a wonderful channel called It's Good to Talk Rant 7946. That's It's Good to Talk Rant 7946. And sir, I don't remember if you told me your name, so I don't know this gentleman's name. But he has a couple of videos where he talks about his experience working in a call center and how it drastically changed him as a person. And I think this is a very important topic. Now, I have talked about how working in a call center will change you, and I have another video about that from about 5 years ago. But today, what I want to talk about is what this gentleman spoke about. Now, this gentleman tells his viewers that he, at one time, was kind of a very quiet guy, laid back, unassuming, and a very kind of, like I used to be. I used to be a very quiet, unassuming, laid back guy, just like this gentleman was in his videos. He says in his videos. And I was somebody that didn't get in any trouble. I always dotted my I's, crossed my T's. I never spoke out against authority. I never questioned authority. I was somebody that never got into arguments. I never got into screaming matches with people. I never lost my cool. I was always very kind of, just like my dad. My dad was very, I would say he was painfully withdrawn, if not sociopathic. He was just very kind of like, he didn't really have an opinion about much of anything. But keep in mind that my perspective of my own father is from the no older than the age of 14. So it's a very adolescent or pre-adolescent viewpoint of my father. And I'm sure he was wrestling with his own demons that I don't know what they were. But he was very quiet, withdrawn, laid back. Very rarely would get into an argument with anyone, until it was usually with my mother, when she got into his face and would just kind of like belittle him and emasculate him and go after him and stuff. Totally different topic. But I was much like my father, very quiet, very laid back. Never questioned authority. I had worked in the corporate world since 1988. And I found that working in call centers changed me. And they made me a completely different person than I am today. And I can't blame it all on call centers. Some of that comes with society and waking up to the evils of society and our culture in the West, and seeing that a lot of it is a lie and a lot of it is concocted, and you're manipulated on a daily basis, and you're showered with an avalanche of propaganda, which again is another story. But to give you a little bit of background, my first experience in call centers was not a bad one. I started off in a very tiny call center in a company called Progressive Communications Technologies. It was a 6-man call center, and we had an assigned client base, all corporate people that would call me up and order phone lines for their different satellite locations around the Cleveland area. Wonderful people, great people. They sent me Christmas cards and birthday cards in the office. I had a working relationship with them, And for the most part, I got along very well with my coworkers and my boss. There was no discipline. There was no, let's watch how much time you're on the phones. Let's make sure you're not in the bathroom too much. There was none of that stuff. And I wore a headset and I had a cubicle. I had a large cubicle. It wasn't a tiny little cubicle. It was a big cubicle with 2 filing cabinets, and I had a computer, and I had the whole shoot match. It was a very nice, easy place to work. And then I moved into a corporate call center. My first experience with a corporate call center was a place called GTE Wireless, which eventually became Alltel Wireless, and then it was bought out by Verizon Wireless. And this call center was bigger. It was like a 250-man call center, and they occupied two or three floors of a building. My first company that I worked for in the first call center was just one floor of a building. It was just, a corner of a building. It wasn't even the whole floor. It was just a corner of the building. And so this new call center was very rigid. They monitored your talk time. It was the first time in my entire life of working. I had worked since the age of 10. I started working, age of 9, delivering newspapers, which it was a job. I hated it. I hated collecting. I didn't mind delivering the newspapers, but collecting, I had to deal with people face to face as a little kid. That was really traumatic for me. But I had been working since the age of 9 or 10. And at this GT Wireless, it was the first time I was ever disciplined. And, the trainer, not even my supervisor, the lady that trained me took me aside and said, "Hey, if you don't get your shit together, we're going to have to fire you. You're doing terrible on the phones." And I had never been experienced into this environment where you had a whole room of people, of 250 people at the time, there was a ticker board on the wall. It was red letters against a black background. It was about 6 feet long and 2 feet high, and it would beep every time there were calls in queue. And it would say every time there were like 10 calls in queue, it would go beep, 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 10 calls holding, get on the phones. And there'd be a supervisor standing over you. And she may as well have had a riding crop in her hand, like a Gestapo hat on. Really cruel, sadistic women that were just constantly on your back to get on the phones. And I had never experienced anything like this in my life, and I was totally petrified. I completely froze. And if it weren't for the tutoring of a coworker who sat on the other side of the wall from me, on the other cubicle wall, a wonderful woman named Robin, I never would have survived there. And she's like, "What's wrong?" And I told her I was about to get fired, and she pretty much fell all over herself to help me. And to this day, I am very grateful to her for her assistance. And I tried to find her here on LinkedIn, but I wrote to her, but most people aren't on LinkedIn all that much. And I wanted to thank her because she went above and beyond to try to help me, and it helped me keep that job. And I had that job, and I worked for that company for about 4 years. So that was my first experience. And it starts, what happens working in a call center is you go in with what they tell you. They tell you that it's such a wonderful place to work, and you're going to have a great time. It's all about having fun. And keep in mind, I've been doing this for 30 years, and this is the scenario they tell you, but they chip away at your confidence, and they chip away at your personality, and they break you down, and they break you down, and they break you down until you're finally either give in to what their demands are, or you fall apart and quit. So let's fast forward. That was my first call center experience where I started to see the foundation of who I was start to chip away. And I started to really question, was I not sharp enough to do this job? I started to question, was I just not a good person? Was I not a good employee? I really undermined my self-confidence. And I wasn't a person at the time that had a lot of self-confidence. And it really torpedoed what little self-confidence I did have at the time. So fast forward a couple of years to 2002, we moved to Arizona, and I start working at a couple different call centers out there, massive call centers. I'm not going to name them all, but by 2006, I was working for Wells Fargo, massive call center to me. I went from, a 250-man call center to a 500-man call center that occupied an entire building. This was probably a 250,000 square foot building with corporate offices, C-suite executives running around. And this call center was an inbound call center. And I sold home equity lines of credit. And This furthered the disintegration of not only my self-confidence, but it furthered my disintegration in my respect and my adoration for the corporate world. Because what I saw behind closed doors in Wells Fargo was a lot of discrimination towards African American people. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but I know one supervisor specifically had it out for one of his employees because she was African American and he got her fired. And I started to look for another job the minute I saw that. And it really shook me what I saw going on there. Number one, I was a salesperson, and it really made me begin to doubt my skills as a salesperson, because I'm usually pretty good on the phones with sales, and I did pretty good at Wells Fargo, but I wasn't doing as good, and I saw myself doing okay there, but I noticed something in the call center world that really made me question the corporate world and question myself too at the same time. The same people each month were the top sales representatives. Now, if you know anything about sales, especially phone sales, it's a numbers game. It's a huge numbers game. It's just like gambling. It's not much different than gambling. And I did some calculations, and I determined that the likelihood, statistically speaking, that the same person each month would get the top sales rep position was, statistically speaking, highly unlikely. And because in the sales environment, in an inbound sales environment with loans, you've got people calling in that are interested in a loan, but the likelihood that you're going to turn that many calls around into a completed sale is highly unlikely, because most people are just kind of testing the waters. They're calling just to see what it's all about. They're interested, but the chances of you turning them around every month, every day, every week, and every month is so, statistically speaking, infinitesimally unlikely that I began to question why and how these people were constantly getting the top sales position. Well, it turned out I found out the top saleswoman on the floor, her mother worked in the processing department. If you know anything about loans, if you get someone to agree to a loan and they sign to it, it goes to a processing department, and a processor processes the loan to get it funded. I'm not going to go into detail, but the processor. So somehow what I determined was that they were taking this woman's applications and getting them to the top of the heap. So keep in mind, this is a 250 to 300 man sales force on a call center. And all these people we were all clamoring for the top sales position, but the same top 10 people were always getting top sales position. And this one woman was always the number one sales representative. And in order to get to the top of the heap and to get the number one position, you had to have the most funded loan applications out of all of your applications that you put through, which means you had to, number one, find an applicant that was qualified, right? You had to find an applicant that was qualified with the best FICO score, because if they didn't meet certain FICO scores, the application would be turned down. You had to find people with the best financial background, so on and so forth. So this person somehow was getting the people that were the best qualified for the loan, and she was fighting an uphill battle against all the rest of us that were submitting applications on a daily basis electronically to the processing department. So somehow, right? Somehow this person was finding the best qualified applicants, getting her applications ahead of the heap, above and beyond everybody else's applications, and getting them funded. So she was the best sales rep and the best funded sales rep. So every month she got her applications through the whole process ahead of the rest of us, got them to fund, meaning the customer got their money, and she was getting the top sales rep. And I went to my boss and I said, statistically, this isn't possible. How does she always get all of these loans funded? So I saw the racism there. I saw the nepotism going on internally. This woman apparently got all of her applications sent to the head of the heap to her mother. I'm speculating. I don't know if this is what was really happening, but it's the only way it could have happened. And how do I know her mother worked in the processing department? Because I met her mother, and I met this woman. She'd bring her mother over and say, "Hey, this is my mother. She works in the processing department." So I knew the deck was stacked against me, and that was not paranoia, and that really undermined and torpedoed my confidence, because here I am for years, 4 years at this company, trying my best to come in, be on time, stay late, work on weekends, the whole thing, putting on a smile, putting up with incompetent supervisors. And I realized that I could never get to number one as long as this woman was on the team that I was on. She was on my team too. She always got number one. And it begins to wear heavily on your psyche and your mind. And you feel beat down, you feel abused, you feel completely just disregarded and dehumanized in this situation. Now, I know some of you psychotherapists out there will say, well, you know, that's all your interpretation of it. No, it's not. No, if you're constantly held back and you're constantly beat up and abused, it does eventually undermine and torpedo your psyche. So from Wells Fargo, I briefly had a stint. I went back to school. I quit there because of the racism and the nepotism. And I went back to school for a couple of years to study web design. My wife got laid off from another company, and so I had to find a job. So I got a job at Verizon Wireless, working in an inbound call center, just taking customer service and technical support calls and billing questions. And this is the first time where I lost my shit. Just like this gentleman in Scotland, he tells a story where a supervisor had belittled him and undermined his integrity and just questioned his integrity. And this gentleman in Scotland, on the other channel I mentioned, lost his shit and screamed and yelled at his supervisor. A gentleman just like myself, laid back. I come from Scottish heritage too. I'm several generations removed from Scottish, but my mother's side of the family, I believe, was all Scottish and a tiny bit Irish. So I go to Verizon Wireless, and Verizon Wireless was an anomaly because their training wasn't 2 weeks. Their training was like 3.5 months. It was really like 4 months of training. It was 3 months of intensive classroom training and then a month of training inside of like a pre-call center. It was a small room where you allegedly were fed just, I guess there were live calls, but it was a separate training room where you had little flags, and it was separate from the big giant call center. It was a small little, like maybe 2,000 square foot room with cubicles, and there were a bunch of trainers and coaches, team coaches roaming the floor, and you'd hold up your flag if you had a question, and they'd run over and they'd help you through the call. So the first 6 weeks of training was just general product knowledge, talking about the different phones, going over the different systems, including email and all that stuff, but all the different, technical systems. And the final part of training, the final month of training, was billing. So we're in class for like the first 8 weeks is other stuff, but the final month, 3 weeks to a month, was intensive training on their billing system. And I'm talking 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 to 4 weeks of just billing. So I had enough. It was just too much. I was losing it. It was like just completely freaking my brain out that we just would have to sit there day in and day out and take knowledge, inbound knowledge about this billing system. And I'm sitting there thinking, how intensive, how crazy does this billing system, we have to spend so much time on it. So the trainer in this class who did the training for billing, let's say his name was Bill, and I've talked about him in another video several years ago, where he was this really fat guy, and he looked like Pugsley from the original Addams Family. He was so fat, his face was bloated, And if you've ever seen somebody that's so fat, almost their eyes are almost hidden and their face is hidden and just fat. And he had a mullet. And on the first day of training, long before we got to billing, when we were doing our class introductions that we all have to do, you stand up and say where you're from and where you used to work and what your hobbies are and how much you like to have your nipples played with and all that stuff. He introduced himself. He goes, "My name is Bill, and I'm from Oklahoma. And I know what you all think of people from Oklahoma, and I know you know that joke that the only things that come out of Oklahoma are steers and blankety blank.
Holy dog Bullshit. Texas, only steers and queers come from Texas, Private Cowboy. And you don't much look like a steer to me, so that kind of narrows it down.
I don't want to hear it. You say anything like that to me, I'll walk you out the door and I'll get you fired myself. Do you understand me? And I'm like, oh, shit. I knew right there when this moron was speaking that I had made a huge mistake with joining this company. Keep in mind, I had dreamed of working for Verizon Wireless. This was and still is the premier cell phone company in our country. I don't know about the world, but in this country, they have superior cell phone service nationwide. I have driven coast to coast across this country, and very rarely, if ever, have dropped a call or have had any problems with signal. Even on cloudy days, rainy days, inclement weather, very rarely. So I felt that they were probably a superior company to work for. But this guy was a mush-mouth, just mongoloid, chubby guy with some type of complex issues, persecution complex, all kinds of things about Oklahoma. I didn't know that. I heard that line in that movie, Full Metal Jacket. But that was a line from a drill instructor in a movie. I don't know anything about. I've driven through Oklahoma 3 or 4 times now, but I don't have any opinions about it one way or the other than what I see on the TV show First 48. So anyway, I know he's just a drooling goofball moron, and he has been given the task of teaching us the billing system, and we are now going on the 3rd week, and I'm losing my shit. I can't take it. I'm sitting at my desk every day, just trying my best not to walk out, just not to leave. So the 4th week comes. He told us the previous week on Friday we were done with billing. So he marches in the room on the 4th week, which is the third month of training. So it's the 3rd week going on the last week of the 3rd month of training, and it's now, we had just finished 3 weeks, consistent, constant, intensive training on billing. We're going in the 4th week, final week of training. He walks and says, I'm sorry, folks, we got to continue our billing. There's a few things they want us to continue to talk about. It's probably going to take the rest of the week. And I lost my shit. I completely lost it. And this is the only time before, the only time since, that I have lost my cool in a corporate environment or with any boss or any position of authority. I stood up and I said, you've got to be kidding me. He's like, what is wrong with you? And I said, you fucking got to be kidding me. We're going to go on and talk about this billing system for another week. We spent 3 weeks on it. Enough. And his face just turned bright red. And he just marched up to the front of the room. There was another trainer in the room. There were 2 trainers in the room. The other guy was this weirdo from God knows where, he had a mullet too from like 1982. And he was very proud of his mullet. The first day of training, he talked about his mullet and how proud he liked his mullet. His wife liked his mullet. Guys, I don't know. If you know anything about working in call centers, it's a freak show. It's an absolute freak show. Not that I'm better than all these people, but you're going to see it's a circus show. It's a circus freak show. And this guy was the biggest freak with his mullet. I mean, who walks into a corporate environment and talks about their haircut that is outdated by at least 20 years, and he's proud of it? He talked about his mullet like it was an animal, like it was something a living being on his head. So this other guy takes me out in the hallway. He's like, hey, Pete, what's going on? What's up with you? And I'm like, I don't know what the other guy's name was now. It's been too many years to say his name was Dan. I said, Dan, I can't take it. We've been talking about billing for 3 weeks. It's constant talk about billing. We've had enough. I know I could speak for the rest of the class because they had enough too. You could tell when the guy announced another week of training on billing, everybody's like, oh my God, like gasping and, groaning and stuff. And he's like, you can't talk like that. You can't explode like that. Especially when you get out on the floor. What are we going to do with you? And I'm like, I felt kind of ashamed in a way, but I felt like, fuck, enough. But I needed the job. But because my wife wasn't working, she had been laid off, from the bank. This is ready to run the collapse of the economy due to the mortgage situation. And I just couldn't contain it anymore. I couldn't contain my anger and my frustration, my disillusionment. And I went from this meek, quiet guy that had spent 3 months in this class and 3 weeks talking about billing to this, what people saw me as this raving lunatic. Keep in mind, all the people around me in the class were not half my age. I was probably 40, 41 at the time. They were probably half my age. Some of them were in their early 20s. So I lost my shit, and Verizon Wireless was a crossroads in my life. It was a crossroads. And I was on one path as this quiet and meek guy, and I lost my shit, and I went home with my wife, and I told her, I said, I know I got to keep this job, but I don't think I can do this call center stuff anymore. And it was a moment in my life where I had made a conscious decision that I was not going to stay at Verizon. I wasn't going to work in call centers anymore. And it was torture. The entire experience changed me. It made me into a more outspoken person. It made me more defiant. It made me more belligerent. It made me question authority. It made me an entirely different person. And from that moment forward, I questioned Verizon. I questioned its tactics. I questioned their politics inside. I questioned their training. I questioned how they got to be so big. And I got into this. This is the company where I had the lady that was so chismosa, this little Mexican girl who had she was like 30 years old, but she had capped teeth and she was really cute, but she would just walk around and do nothing all day. She did nothing. And, you know, she sat like 10 feet from my desk, but she was never at her cubicle. And there were rumors about her going around. She was, that her husband worked there too, but she was having an affair with another supervisor a couple aisles over. There's all kinds of gossip going on about her. And I complained about her. I went to HR and I said, she's never at her desk. You know, what the hell's going on with this chick? And what did she do? She moved me to another team. She moved me over to the Zippity Bebop guy. And people told me not to go to the Zippity Bebop guy's team because he was well known for putting people on PIPs, or performance improvement plans. And he was an African-American gentleman, very well dressed, well-spoken, who was very proud that he was a United States Marine, a former United States Marine, which what that has to do with anything to work in a call center. I have all the respect for our guys and gals that work and have served in our armed forces. But this guy was an absolute disgrace to the flag he represented and how he treated his employees. So I go over to this other guy's team. They trade me after like 6 months or something. They put me on this other guy's team because I guess I'm too outspoken and I'm questioning things internally. And I get over there and, you know, he's never there either. He's been with the company 18 years. He's very proud to say how he's been with the company for 18 years, and he's got the team divided into two sections. He's got like white people in this row in the front row and then black people in the back row. And it was like segregated, a weird segregated team. So I get on his team and he's almost immediately puts me on a PIP. So the rumors and what people told me about him were true. He put me on a PIP, a performance, and I said, why you put me on a PIP? So I got in his face. Every time we had our one-on-one, we had our one-on-one once a month. One of the last times I talked with him, I said, how can you put me on a PIP? You personally put me on a PIP, but you're never here. And you're never here to coach me and never here to make sure I get better. And there's nobody here to help me get better. And he went, well, you know, you got some points there, young man. Zippity bebop. Whoa, yeah. You know, and he was just like stunned that I got in his face. And he was a really good looking guy. You know, he was, he always wore what I call golf colors, the very pastel or brightly lit oranges and pinks and greens. He was a golfer. And Arizona, if you know anything about Arizona, you could swing a cat and hit a golf course. They're everywhere. There's probably 50 golf courses in the valley in Phoenix. I don't know if that's an accurate number. There's a lot of them. There was at least 5 near my house. He was always gone. He had been there 18 years. He had accumulated all this vacation time. So he was always off on vacation. And I said, how can you sit there with a clear conscience and put me on a PIP with no recourse, no way for me to get better while you're out golfing. And he just kind of sat there and stared at me. And I'm like, really, it's the truth. You're never here. And I'm tired of it. So I got outspoken with, I've never gone up against a supervisor in my life until this trainer, this moron trainer, and the zippity bebop guy. So I went to HR after about being on this PIP for a couple of months and never seeing any light at the end of the tunnel. I went to HR and I said, hey, can I talk to you about my PIP? So this lady pulls up my record and she goes, you're not on a PIP. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, this dude, let's say his name is Jimmy. Jimmy put me on a PIP. And she's like, you're not on a PIP. We don't have any record of you being on a performance PIP or anything else like that. And they said, you're kidding. She's like, no. She's like, I'll look into it. And this is the only time in my life that HR has stood up for me. Because I have a feeling these HR people saw the woman that I worked with in HR seemed to kind of side with some of us, which I've never seen that before. Because what happened right after this, I was traded to another guy's team. And I don't know if Billy ever came back. And he and I used to get into these discussions about how Verizon is the greatest company and they'll never close this call center. And what do you know? That call center was closed a couple of years ago. And I hope this guy's sitting on his ass somewhere on the curb, drinking Ripple, begging for change. He was such an asshole. And this changed me. And the point to all this is this changed me. I don't know if it's for the better, but I'm able to stand up and question authority now because I'm telling you people, these call center representatives that we are overseen and managed by the dregs of society. The supervisors who somehow get promoted to supervisor are the bottom of the barrel when it comes to corporate people. They're not even corporate. I've worked in the corporate environment. This is not corporate. This is an asylum. And the people that run the asylum are these crazy managers that used to be working at Kohl's or Walmart or something like that. And, they're sitting out back smoking a Marlboro Red and, pulling their puds. And all of a sudden they've been given the title supervisor and they think they're all that in a bag of chips. And they're not. These are incompetent people who can't think. They have no critical thinking skills. They're just corporate drones that they're given their orders, just like this guy. He was United States Marines. You give them their orders, they run on a machine gun fire, and that's all there is. They either live through it or they don't. And again, I'm not knocking the Marines or the armed services, but you guys know that you're drilled in your head in basic training. You run into gunfire, or you're going to the brig, or whatever they call it. You're treated like garbage. You're treated lower than a dog. And if they don't like you for some reason, like when I screamed and yelled in training, you're done. You'll never see the light of day. You'll never get promoted. You'll never be taken seriously. And you don't even have to scream and yell. If you're just not like the rest of the people on the call center floor, you're done. You're completely done. And most of the people I've worked with in my 40s were half my age. These are kids in their 20s. These are kids that thought they were living it up working at Verizon. In conclusion, the call centers do change you. If you stay there long enough, it'll make you cynical, paranoid, belligerent. It'll make you outspoken against authority. It'll make you question reality. It affects everything. And it's for the better, because I do believe that our world, the Western world especially, is controlled and dominated by corporations, pharmaceutical companies, and government factions that have manipulated our minds into thinking that we've got it made, that we're living, quote, the American dream, unquote. And all the American dream is push, push, push for the peons, for the servants of the world to do our bidding so we can make billions and trillions of dollars, so we can have a yacht with a leather mistress on a tropical island with little children as slaves. And it's disgusting. And I never saw it that way before. In Verizon Wireless, I want to thank them for opening my eyes to the evils of the corporate world and for the evils of the cellular communications industry. It's a dark, evil, insidious industry, And I happen to be using an iPhone right now to record this. Crazy shit, man. So thank you for watching. If you like my videos, give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, punch the subscribe button. And I bid you all adieu, and I ask each and every one of you to not work in call centers. Please don't work in a call center. It's a dark, insidious, evil place to work, and you're never going to get anywhere. They're going to sell you. They're going to sell you so many pipe dreams that they can't fulfill that you'll never, ever get to achieve. All right, I'm PTPOP. Hasta la vista, baby.
Crossing the blues gonna be the end of me.